Welcome back to It's a Tool Thing. Today with a little quick tutorial on PTOs for Allison transmissions, or installing PTOs. I'm just going to go over a few highlights and some tools that come in handy. The first thing is I'm talking about the World transmissions. They take this gasket here. It's only one gasket choice. They are calibrated for just one gasket, so you don't have to shim them like you do with other PTOs. And as you can see here, there's a ridge here and an indent on this side, and this gasket's a metal gasket with like a rubber coating on it, which is different than the PTO covers. This is the PTO mounting gasket. You install this with the ridges facing towards the PTO, away from the transmission. So if you were looking at it like this right here, that would be on the transmission. You'd be installing the PTO here. They tend to have a lot of leaks and come in loose issues. So blue Loctite is your friend. In some cases we have had to go red Loctite, which is not ideal because the bolts are really hard to get to. So getting them out in the future, it can be a problem. This is an example of the more common bolts. Generally they're this length here, but some kits come with a shorter bolt for the tighter access spots. And then they have two dowel pins. It's a 10 bolt pad, and there's usually two dowel pins. Some of them are actually a drilled through hole now, which is kind of interesting. Unless you have a really old PTO that you're taking off, they'll be the 10 millimeter 12 point. Back in the day, probably 2000s or better, somewhere in there, they had a 5/16 Allen, if I remember correctly. It was definitely an Allen, and that created its own set of challenges because all the new ones are a 10 millimeter 12 point. The bolts are 10 by 1.50 thread pitch, and the access on them is pretty meager. So that's kind of where I was thinking about some of the tools. Probably my favorite tool, which is currently broken, and it's a snap-on tool and cannot be warrantied. Well, it can be warrantied, but they won't give you what you need, is this one here. So rule number one, when you have one of these, don't let anybody borrow it. Definitely don't use an impact on it. He actually didn't use an impact from what I understand, but he was really reefing on it. I can't remember if he was doing a PTO or not. I think he was. But the thickness of this thing's pretty small, and we'll get into a lot of them, probably 90+%. But it's an older part. The newer ones have a thicker shaft, and the ball end is much bigger, and it's not a 12 point. And everything's got to be a 12 point on this. But if you run across one of these, I don't know if you can read that part number. It doesn't look like it's coming up on screen. It's a FLX M810. It's a snap-on tool. That is a definite grab. If you see one, they are expensive, usually over 50 bucks. I think I paid about 40 bucks for this one. And I've been keeping my eyes out to get another one. I've missed a few on eBay. So I keep my eyes open. But this is definitely a really good tool for PTOs. I'm hoping at some point that they reintroduce this part in a 12 point from Snap-on, and I'll get it warranted then, because he's willing to warranty it, but he wants to give me a 6 point, which if you need a 10 millimeter 6 point, sure, that'd be fine, even it is definitely bulkier. But I ended up replacing it with this. This is technically an impact rated, and as you can see, the joint does not stay tight at all. This is branded Mac Tools. I'm sure it's not made by Mac Tools. It's actually made in Taiwan, if I remember correctly. But this one does pretty good. It doesn't get into quite, probably 75% of the things. As you can see here, the head dimensions are quite a bit bigger, but still it fits in a lot of the places. And the shortness of this to the ball end really does help. And the length on these, it'd be nice if they had them in other lengths, like shorter and then possibly even longer. This one was a little bit shorter. It was about an inch shorter. You can see that getting on camera here. Roughly, it's about the same length. But this Mac one does work pretty good. It's definitely a good buy. I've got a whole bunch of these, and there's certain scenarios where they're really handy. But this 10mm is a must get. Part number, you can see that on screen there. I think there it looks like it's coming up pretty good. XUEP10mm, definitely a good buy. They're about $50 a piece too, I believe. New off the truck. But you know, it's worth it in the fact that, because odds are sooner or later you're going to strip it out. You can see this one's already got quite a bit of wear, and I'll bet you it's exclusively doing PTOs, because I end up doing a lot of them working on Allison's. So that's definitely a good buy there. This one here, 3/8 drive. It's Proto. I haven't been I haven't been impressed with this one. I've actually warranted it, I think, twice now. But it's a 3/8 standard universal Proto. Probably be better to get a snap-on, but I end up with a couple of these. And it does work, but it definitely doesn't fit as many places. Part number on this one is a 5273. I'm not sure if AM's involved in that or not. It does say AM after it, but I'm not 100% sure. 10mm 12-point 3/8 drive. It does stay pretty tight, but I broke a few of these already and stripped them out. If I remember, I don't think the actual universal broke, but the end cracked. And it is pretty thin, which is a key too. This recess here definitely does help get it into some of the tighter places. If that was a bulkier end, it wouldn't be as effective, but not my number one choice. Standard 12-point 10mm quarter drive socket. Again, does work sometimes. You can put a universal on it also, but definitely not my first choice. This is a snap-on TMM D10. It will gain some access at some point, but definitely not my first choice. This one's highly recommended though. It's a snap-on 12-point 10mm, once again, obviously. Quarter drive universal. Part number TMUM10A. This one here, definitely a go-to. As you can see, I've used this quite a bit, and I've had to warranty these a few times. You will break them, so definitely get a snap-on or something you can get warranted. But you definitely want a small profile, and this will get into some pretty tight places. You can actually get them bound up pretty easy. And I don't break them near as often because I've cut back using these to torque with, which torquing with a flex is definitely not ideal anyways, but sometimes that's the only way you can get in there. And I try really hard to torque every one of the fasteners. That way, if something does come loose, I know it had Loctite. I know I use fresh bolts. I don't think I mentioned that before, but I prefer to use fresh bolts every time. They come with an install. You can get an install kit, or the new PTOs come with an install kit. But these will break if you try to use them to torque with. Obviously, I use various extension lengths depending on the situation. I didn't grab any extensions. Same with quarter and 3/8 drive. But this one's a must for doing PTOs. Probably the most common two are this one and this one here. 95% of the time, as far as sockets go. Torque adapter. Sometimes you can't get in there with anything but this, and you want to get it, you know, basically almost to torque, and then use this because you've got like no room for swing. This is a Cornwell. I've actually had no issues with it. I don't even think I've ever broke it. But if you're intent on torquing every single fastener, probably should invest in this torque adapter. It's got a 2-inch offset center to center. So you got to calculate that. The torque spec is supposed to be 45 foot-pounds, 46 the high side. So I tend to go 45 because they do come loose from time to time. There's a lot of weight hanging off those bolts, and sometimes they don't have mounting brackets on the rear of the pumps, and the pumps can get pretty big. So this one here in particular is a part number CT GM102TA. Snap-on one would work fine, but definitely anything with a smaller profile. The snap-on ones tend to be a little bit wider. Would be an advantage because there's not a lot of room for swing. Not the number one tool you need for sure, but is definitely a tool with adding to the arsenal. And then we'll get into the wrenches. Obviously your regular snap-on 10 millimeter. I consider this a long 12 point. Obviously you're only going to be using the box end. Works fine. Part number on this is SOXEM110. Just your standard wrench. I've been a lot of them. I used to have a Mac Precision Torque. No. Knuckle Saver. And I kept bending and actually doing these PTO bolts back in about 2000-ish. And I warrantied it out multiple times. And finally, actually, he gave me a credit, and I just bought a snap-on one. And I've never bent one of the snap-on ones yet. So that's something to be said. Standard wrench definitely comes in handy. That this angle right here, you can see that, you know, just the regular 10 degree or whatever it is, bend, definitely gives you some clearance in some situations. We'll touch on these other two briefly, but obviously shorter is better sometimes. Sometimes you need more length. This is their short wrench, I believe is what they refer to it. 10 millimeter. There you go. Part number OEX M10. Sometimes usually got to use something longer to break it loose, but when you're wheeling the thing in and out, but it's a little bit snug, this little bit of extra length, but not so long that it's catching on something, can come in handy. Basically, as many 10 millimeter wrenches as you can find is what it's going to come down to. And then this is a snap-on, or excuse me, a Mac, what they would call a midget size in snap-on, but it's the extra short. It comes in handy also. If you can see that, I think it's coming through there. Part number on this one is an SC210 MMR. Definitely comes in handy. Not as much as the other two, because then you've got such short leverage unless it's basically be able to screw it by hand. But there are times. Zero-degree offset, or performance wrench, as Snap-on refers to it. The additional length is very welcoming. It really does make a difference. As you can see, I keep my tools in spotless condition here. See the dirt in there. Just noticed it when I was staring at it. This wrench here, it tends to, you can get in there on some of them, but the length of it and not having that offset definitely is not number one choice. Part number on this is a XDHF M110 or 1011 with 10-11 millimeter. It is definitely a good buy. I'd actually almost like to have another one of these in like a super extra long with that standard offset. It's funny, all my sockets are magnet. I got a magnet tray. So that was handy. This one here is a real helper too. This is a Mac tool, or Macco, excuse me. It's a spline drive, which I'm not a huge fan of spline drive, but I've not had an issue with it. 10 millimeter once again. They tend to fit really tight on the 10 millimeter fasteners. That can be an issue. At least this particular wrench. Obviously this would be the same as the other one, zero offset. But the ratcheting wrench, and I don't have any other ratcheting wrenches. This is actually the only one that I have that I use. And I should have grabbed the I think the minor Cornwell, but the mountain style wrenches with the offset can come in handy also. This one won't fit in a lot of places. There are some it will fit in because of the width of this is too much. But if you can get it in there, you can save some time. You do have to be careful because there's no reverse switch on this one that you could back in, because you can get yourself kind of backed into a corner. Definitely not the first choice, but it's on the list. Then we come to our final two. Snap-on 10mm 12-point, old Snap-on underlined. This is I believe they call this the 10-degree offset. This one works fairly well, but in all these are got the same exception. You know, it all depends on what's in the way. Part number XBM 1011. It really does get in there pretty well, but you still run into issues. This offset's not quite enough. So recently I actually picked up, and somebody told me it wasn't a good buy, as far as they had the same set and it never came in handy. But for this 10mm, it's already made me the money to pay for the entire set. I've used it multiple times. This is what I believe Snap-on refers to, another Snap-on older underlined wrench, as a 60-degree offset. And that additional offset really does come in handy. This has probably become number one or number two choice for wrenches on the PTO. You get a little more length than a standard wrench. Not much, but a little bit. But that offset really does make a difference. So you can see here, if I can kind of hold them at the same plane, it really does help a little bit, depending on the obstructions, obviously. So the part number on this one, in case you're curious, is a XOM 1011. I said a 6-degree offset. Definitely a good purchase for PTOs. I don't know if it'll work for a whole bunch of other stuff. I'm sure it does. There's going to be times where that's the same with everything. Access dependent. But out of these tools, if I could only have 3, it would be these 3. Obviously, I would love to have this one in there, to be honest. And I would replace this one with this one if I had one. But this one does very well. This one does a little better. Unfortunately, it's an outdated item and you can't get a new one. And then it's basically, when you're doing this, I literally grab all this out immediately in a couple extensions. Quarter drive and 3/8. And you just got to figure out what fits. So it's kind of an overrun. Basically, you get everything that says 10mm out and stick it on the floor and get underneath there and figure out what fits. So I just want to do a quick overview. Hope this was helpful. Please like and comment down below. And as always, have a great day.